Greetings, quilters. We made flannel quilts for some of our great grandchildren. We hadn't planned to put this online, so it's short and missing many steps, but I think it has some value, so here it is. This is a simple tied flannel quilt for children. Look at these young boys and how happy they are with their new quilts. This is the reason we quilt. The first step in the process of making a quilt is to design it or choose a pattern. The next step is to figure out the type of material, colors, and how much fabric you need for the quilt. For small children, we decided to use flannel for the texture and cuddle factor. We have not worked with flannel for quite a while, so we looked online and the recommendation for seam allowance was 1/2 inch. If you work with this material frequently, a 1/4 inch seam allowance may work for you. We chose 1/2 inch and it worked out very well for us. With plans for the quilts, we were able to calculate the yardage needed for the blocks, the borders, the binding, the batting, and the quilt back. With the yardage needed, it's off to the store. We like the fabric mill in Orem, Utah. Fortunately for us, the boy's mother was with us and she picked out the fabrics for each quilt. The colors and prints are critical to the success of the finished product. These quilts are simple block quilts with simple borders. All quilts are the same size, so we cut all the blocks and border pieces before sewing. The binding is made from regular quilt fabric, which is more durable, and the edge of the quilt gets a lot of wear. We keep the pieces for each quilt in its own box until ready to sew. When all the pieces are cut and ready to be sewn, we lay the blocks out and arrange them the way we want them to be sewn together. When we started, we were planning to sew 2 blocks together and then the next 2, etc. We decided that we could pin an entire row together and then sew it. Flannel fabric is very stretchy and requires pinning about every 2.5 inches to keep the edges from getting out of alignment with each other. We use painter's tape on the sewing machine as a guide for the seam allowance. Iron the seams of the row in the same direction, but the opposite direction of the adjoining row. Seams ironed in opposite directions will allow the seams to nest properly. The points of the squares will match. We like to align and nest the seams carefully and pin each nested seam first. Then we go back and finish pinning the entire seam with pins spaced about every 2.5 inches. Sometimes the edges don't exactly match. Align them the best you can and finish pinning. Sew each row to the adjoining row to finish the quilt top. The edges of the quilt top are longer than the width of the fabric, so we need to sew 2 pieces of border material together. Align the center of the border with the center of the quilt. Pin the border to the quilt top, right sides together, spacing pins about 2 to 2.5 inches apart. Multiple borders add variety and beauty to the quilt top. We planned to tie these quilts as little kids like to play with the quilt ties, and the ties can accentuate the colors of the quilt. It is best to stretch the back, batting, and quilt top on a quilting frame. Again, it's important to use thumbtacks about every 3 inches, give or take, to prevent damage to the flannel material. Use a large needle, such as a tapestry needle or a yarn darner needle, so you can get the yarn through the eye of the needle. We use fishing leader to pull the yarn through the eye of the needle. Tying bright yarn to one end of the leader will help locate the leader when starting a new needle and thread. Push the needle through the quilt and bring it up again from the underside. Space the down and up about 3/16 of an inch apart. Hold the yarn on the underside of the quilt to make sure it doesn't tangle, and then tie a double knot, such as a square knot or a granny knot. Space the knots as required by the type of batting you are using. Our spacing is about 4.5 inches. Tie each knot as you go, making a loop over the yarn, and bring the yarn under and then over. For the second half of the knot, make the loop on the opposite side of the yarn. When you have tied all of the yarn, go back and cut halfway between the knots. The quilt is now assembled together. We tried to tie the edge of the quilt, but the quilt frame was directly under where we needed to pull the yarn. We decided to finish tying the edge after we removed the quilt from the quilt frame. We trimmed the edge of the quilt. We finished tying the quilt and then sewed the binding on the quilt. This is Grayson's quilt. This is Lucas's quilt. This is Bennett's quilt. It's important to add a name plate to your quilt. It should include date, who the quilt is made for, and who made the quilt, and any other things you think are appropriate. We entered this quilt into the local quilt show, knowing that it would not take a prize, but that it might inspire someone to try making a quilt. This should make your heart happy. Your kids will remember you longer than their quilt will last, even if they are grand or great-grand children or friends or neighbors. Thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation. Carol says these are love quilts.